great to see you. And we are studying the history of this great country by the name of Israel. And we're studying its greatness because, like a lot of countries of the world, nobody wants to give God the blessing or the praise for what he's led them through. And I think we could probably say the same thing about Israel, especially since they've been blinded to the fact that Jesus has come. And now we're looking at this thing like, how's this all going to come back together? You know, how are the Jewish people all going to come back into Israel? And I think we've planted a pretty good understanding of that. I'm not going to get into the lost tribes because there's nothing lost with God. Myrtle, it's good to see you. Evelyn, Blackie, good to see you guys this morning. In this history of Israel, the thing that strikes me the most is, do we understand every second of it? I don't think we do. But at the end of the day, God has written it all down in this book, and we've read enough verses to know some things, and we are learning. So, Sammy, good to see you. Benita, good to see everybody. So when it comes to the lost 10 tribes, the reason that we even get that statement is because the Jewish people were descendants of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin in that current day. And, these other 10 tribes were scattered and all these different things happened. But there is a remnant of these folks, and somehow, God's going to pull it all back together. Just as I think maybe it might be interesting, he's talking about Ezekiel 37, the valley of the dry bones, when we talk about the rapture of the church. And guess what they're going to do, TG, at the rapture of the church? They're going to take everybody who's in the grave out of the grave, and those that are walking around alive during this time will be caught up to meet the Lord. So there's a lot going on. So Mourning, TG, good to see you this morning. So as far as getting into who's lost in this 10 tribes and where did they go and how did they scatter, this is a little bit of speculation, okay? But at the end of the time, part of this thing of Israel getting the land in 1948, becoming its own country, its own state, whatever you want to call it, and being recognized throughout the world, started this migration back into the place. So the place of Israel. So let me see. I don't know here. I don't want to skip too far apart. Let me see here what we've got. It says, when the times of the Gentiles have been fulfilled. Now, once again, let's think about the times of the Gentiles, from the Babylonian captivity all the way through to the Roman rule. We know about the 4 great kingdoms, and we're going to learn a little bit more about that here. We may reach it this morning. The Great Tribulation, we know about that, what's going to happen the last 3.5 years of the 7-year tribulation period. It was talked about in Zechariah 14. Jesus talks about it in Matthew chapter 24. And that Great Tribulation, at the end of that 7-year period, Jesus will come back. And it says in Zechariah 12:10, I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplications. Then Christ will come back to Jerusalem. So at his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. Now you can reference that in Zechariah 14:4. That's where that verse comes from. So good morning, Miss Leah. I'll probably see you here in a little bit. I'm going to do cover for Miss Michelle Terry. Needed a half a day, so I'm going to be over for just a little bit and see you guys. So, and then they shall look for me upon whom they have pierced. Zechariah chapter 12:10. Now, once again, Zechariah is saying they will look for the Messiah that they pierced. And Zechariah is writing about this, 500-600 years before Jesus comes to this earth. So he's writing down, hey, they're going to look for the one that they pierced. So the nation of Israel, the Jewish nation, okay, will be converted during this period of time, because during the tribulation period, they're finally going to realize, hey, Jesus was Jesus, and we need to seek him out because he's after us right now. And these 144,000 Jewish men, they get sealed to preach, and there's where we're at, right now. So in Isaiah 66:8, let's look at this verse. Who hath heard such a thing? Who hath seen such things? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day, or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth her children. So once again, what coming forth, being born, how was Jesus born? Jesus was born in the manger, but where his real birth came from, that changed our status, was us being overcome death, hell, and the grave, the same way that Jesus overcame death, hell, and the grave, because of his resurrection. So if I go to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 8, it reads this way: "And last of all, Jesus was seen by me also, and as one born out of due time." So Paul's saying here that, that his was a premature birth, and that his new birth is a type of birth of the Jewish nation when the Lord returns, and not of the new birth of a Christian. So once again, the new birth of Israel, their eyes are open, and you think they're blessed now, and they have these unconditional promises of God now, but they are really going to be set up, when God opens their eyes and they see who Jesus was, and they realize where they're at, and they repent and come to him full speed, right? As they will. Now, will every single person get saved? I don't see why, because every single person's not getting saved around us, and we know everything there is to know about the Bible, and I don't mean that, but we know enough to know we need to get saved, right? Yeah, that's what I use too, Myrtle, is this phone, and I can't see a whole lot either. But yes, good morning to those that we do see their names popping up, and good morning to those that have already scrolled by. So, again, pretty interesting stuff. Now, where am I getting all this? Am I making these verses up? Of course not. But Clarence Larkin really compiled this well, and it makes this a whole lot easier than me flipping all over the Bible, reading one verse at a time. Plus, his commentary is pretty much right on. Now, he did get into a pretty lengthy discussion about the lost 10 tribes and how he thinks that might come back to being. I'm not even going to get into that, because I'm going to go to 1 Thessalonians, I think it is, where it said the dead in Christ shall rise first, and those that are walking around shall be caught up to meet him, and so shall we ever be at the rapture of the church. So I'm going to figure if God can bring a body with no life in it out of the grave, and all the people that have ever believed, that God can put his people back where he wants them to be. So that's kind of how I do it. Now, once again, we get into some heavy discussions. People send us a bunch of stuff. Sometimes people will say something on here. Good morning, Pam and Butch. Good to see you guys. And when I did the podcast, and it really went out, I mean, I think we had 100,000 people listen over the years that we did that, because it kept a tally. And, I always got the Satan worshipers and the demonic forces, and they always wanted to make comments, and they always wanted to click on, because you could click on and I could hear your voice and things like that. And that's another thing we could probably do here to make things more interactive. If you guys wanted to say something, is we would click something and you could be heard. So we may work on that, as we get better at what we're doing. We even have this thing where we could have our own TV station, and we would be like Netflix on your TV apps. You would see, our app might say Sunday School, or, whatever we named it. But anyway, that would be something that would go out. My brother does some movies, Christian movie type things, and like even the Sansons that have done the Christian movies. It'd be a good place locally that people could say, "Hey, man, you can see this." But anyway, those are things down the road. What we need to worry about right now is what in the world's going to happen. How do we know where we're at right now in this day and time? Sandy, good to see you this morning. Sorry I didn't chat with you guys yesterday. I had to get back to the house. I had a couple of phone calls that were coming in, and I had to have that steak sandwich from the diner. Zoom I do have now. I do have the capability to do Zoom where we could invite people onto that. And Facebook has a way to put Zoom out there. But what I don't understand is on my end, I could do a Zoom call and 4 or 5 faces would be on here. But then I don't know how it goes out. You know what I'm saying? I don't know how it would go out on Facebook. But anyway, yes, we will get to that point. It's just like everything. Some people, I've been guilty of this too, starting a business and putting way too much into it. And then if it doesn't work, then you've spent all that money and it doesn't work. Which it's really hard to get past what we're doing here, because this is real simple. This is our phone. David White, good to see you this morning. This is the phone. We turn it sideways. We can interact a little bit. You guys can type stuff in. So it works out pretty good, But anyway, let's talk about Israel. Let's talk about God's master plan and this fullness of times, and how in the world do we get from the Babylonian captivity to present day in this time when it's the Gentiles' world. And then we're going to go into this tribulation period, this 70th week of Daniel, right? He had the 69 weeks of prophecy, which was 69 weeks times 7 years, so 400 and whatever, almost 490 total years of history of dealing with the Jewish people. So they always were God's chosen people. They always will be. So please don't get caught up in this craziness like some of our elected officials that want to follow Hamas or support them, because it doesn't matter. Even if Israel was in the wrong, you better be on the right side of this. And I'm not trying to laugh at the innocent lives that have been lost, but Israel's taken a lot over the years from the threats from Iran and Iraq and the Hamas, and they're all backed up there and they're right next door to them, and just be on the right side is all I can say. And the right side for you today is to recognize Jesus and to get saved, right? That's what this thing is all about. So let's go just a little bit further. As to the children of Israel, when they came out of Egypt, they took with them of the riches of the Egyptians. Now, you can go back and look at this in Exodus chapter 12, verse 35. When God hardens Pharaoh's heart, there's a couple of things going on here. The people were murmuring against Pharaoh, saying, let these people go. Man, oh man, their God is God. And I just can't get past that statement. Think about that for a second, Harlan and David. Their God is God. Listen, your God, if he's Jesus Christ, is God. And I just can't get past that. Your God is God. And you have a relationship with him personally that you can pray to Jesus and talk to him every single day. And we need to do that, because it's just beyond, right? What we can imagine. But look here. He says, the riches of the Egyptians, they gave them the gold, they gave them the silver, they gave them their silverware, and they said, go serve your God, because your God has completely dominated. I was going to say terminated, but it didn't terminate them until Pharaoh takes off after him, and then God drowns them all there in the Red Sea. But when the children of Israel return to their own land, it will be to possess and occupy all that was promised to Abraham. So they're fighting and arguing and dropping bombs right now, but they're not even discussing all the land that was promised to Abraham. But they will get that. And that 1,000-year millennial reign, which is 7 years after the church leaves here. So theoretically, the church could leave today, and that would start that clock ticking. So it is not long, and that's probably where the Jewish people are going to, when God opens their eyes again, they're probably going to say, whoa, this is the real deal, because we know that there's 7 years during this tribulation period. Then there's the 1,000-year millennial reign where we get all the land that was promised us. So it's going to be kind of an amazing event. So let's look at this. Let's go a little farther and look at this royal grant, is what Clarence Larkin calls it. And what is the royal grant? This means that you're going to get the land from the river of Egypt, which I assume would be the Nile, unto the great river, the river Euphrates, that's talked about in Genesis 15:8. And according to Ezekiel, in Ezekiel 48, verses 1 through 29, from Hamath, northeast to Damascus, to Kadesh on the south. The temple will be rebuilt. The glory of the Lord will return. Sacrifices will again be offered. The government will be reestablished. And the nations of the earth will be blessed through Israel, according to Zechariah 8:20. So once again, several hundred years before Jesus comes, this prophet by the name of Zechariah not only talks about this Messiah, not only talks about us being able to overcome death, hell, and the grave, but he also talks about one day when the Jewish people will sit at the head of all the tables, and all nations will be blessed through Israel. And guess what? Who made that original promise? God made that to Abraham. So again, it was mentioned in Genesis. It's mentioned here in Zechariah. So this is powerful because it's two places where it's mentioned. And right now, the whole world is watching what Israel's doing. So even in the back of a person's mind that doesn't even know Jesus, guess what they're thinking? Man, this may be right. And this is how Jesus gets people's attention. Karen McKiff, good to see you. I hope you guys are doing all right. So there's the land. If you ever wondered what the royal grant of land is, go back to Ezekiel chapter 48, verses 1 through 29. Go back to Genesis chapter 15, verse 18. And they're going to show you. Here's what was promised to these folks. And, that land stretches almost into what was Babylon, which would be Iraq and Iran right now. And then it goes up north into Syria. And, once again, I don't have the present day overlay to lay the map over to see who's there. But it's a whole lot bigger than that little piece of land that they keep showing on the 6 o'clock news. Okay? So let's go forward. It says, for a continued account of the future of the Jewish nation, see the chapters of the Great Tribulation and the Kingdom, and carefully study the chart on the Jewish nation and the millennial land. So again, these things are going to happen. So as we've kind of laid this out, now let's talk about the Gentiles, okay? Let's talk about where this thing starts. Let's go back to Nebuchadnezzar and his dream, and bring this thing forward. So now we can see that Daniel, when he's prophesying and talking about these things, how they come to pass, and how he does name the 4 great kingdoms of the world, and he's only in the first one, the Babylonian captivity. So this is pretty strong, because what do we know about the Babylonian captivity? We know the Medo-Persians took over. We know the third great world kingdom was this guy named Alexander the Great, who was a Greek man who conquered the known world. Kingdom was so big that when he died, that 4 generals had to take over his kingdom. Well, when you get into the prophet of Daniel and you start studying it, guess what? There was one great big horn with 4 little horns broken off from that, signifying 4 different kingdoms came out of that last world power, or that third world power. And then the 4th one was the Romans. And once again, here's something we don't really understand. How in the world would a downtrodden country like Rome get revigorated or regenerated or come back to power? Well, once again, Rome was a lot of Europe during this time. So it could be just that area in general. Could be actually Rome. I mean, I've even had preachers and teachers teach that one of Judas's rewards will be that Judas gets to come back and be the Antichrist. Now, I don't understand how that would be possible, because he is, the Antichrist is this charismatic guy. I mean, he's going to be probably young and good looking. He's probably going to have all this, he's going to have the Jeff Bezos, the Elon Musk, the Warren Buffett riches. People are going to want to be like him. People are going to idolize him. And that's why it's so scary when your politics get ahead of reality, like the Trump train and, the liberal craziness of, everybody wanted an electric car. Well, if you've seen in the news this week, it just ain't feasible. Excuse my English, right? But it's just not, it just can't happen. So that's a big problem. They've sold you on the electric. Well, we can't do it. Okay, it can't be done. And I'm not saying that technology won't come, but it's still not where it needs to be. So we get into all these things. Timmy, good to see you this morning. I hope you've been doing good. And we stop and look around at this, and we're like, man, everything this Bible has talked about from the beginning has come true. So now we're sitting here looking at these 4 world empires, and I better quit blowing and get into it. I'm going to lose my time today. Yeah, we got some time. So let me just read to you, because I think sometimes I skim over something, and I don't want you to miss this. But let's talk about the times of the Gentiles. Let's talk about what happens in this, I think it was 605, 595 BC. So we're talking about 500 or 600 years before Jesus. This great world power by the name of Babylon or Babylonian comes to power. So let's back up and do some groundwork. It says the scripture speaks of three classes of people on the earth: the Jewish nation, the Gentile, and the church. So once again, isn't it kind of interesting that the church is spoken of? It's not even mentioned in the Old Testament, but when we get in here and we get to the New Testament and Jesus introduces the church, that it's its own thing. It is a big thing to God. We are the bride of Christ. We are members of the body of Christ. So it's a big thing. So the cool thing about the church is it's going to be made up, and it is made up, of the Jewish and the Gentile people. Because why? Because every book written in the Bible was written by a Jewish man. So outside of the church, okay, you'll have your Jewish people, but everyone who is not Jewish would be Gentiles, for manner of speaking of the Bible. So Abraham was the first Hebrew. His grandson Jacob, his name was changed to what? Israel. Are you with me? So if his name is changed to Israel in Genesis chapter 32, he's going to go on and he's going to have 12 sons, and those 12 sons are going to be the heads of the 12 tribes of Israel. If you go back and you look in the new heaven and the new earth, when this city comes down almost touching the ground, it kind of looks like a Hershey kiss to me, the way I've seen it, drawn out and stuff. There's going to be 12 doors on this place, and in these 12 doors, over the head of each door will be one of the 12 tribes' names, one of the sons. So that's pretty interesting, okay? 10 of these tribes become known as Israel, and 2, which is Judah and Benjamin, they become known as Judah. So 721 years BC, or before Jesus Christ, Israel was carried captive to Assyria. And in BC 606, Judah was carried captive to Babylon. So once again, the Assyrians, of course, were first. And if you recall, we had a moment there a few weeks ago when an angel of the Lord killed 185,000 Assyrians all at one time. So there has been conflict from the beginning of time for these folks. So let's go and let's start looking here. BC 606, Judah was carried captive to Babylon. When Judah, after 70 years, returned from captivity, a fair representation of the whole 12 tribes returned with them. From that time, they have been known as the Jewish nation. So the Jewish people were God's chosen people, but when they fell into adultery, they were carried into captivity, and they were supplanted by the Gentiles. The nations of Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon were anxious to conquer and supplant Israel. See, they've always been wanting. Now, once again, this is proof of our God being real, is Egypt wanted this from the book of Exodus right on through. Okay? So this is not new. Even in Genesis there were battles. There was a time where the 12 sons, or 10 of them, go in and massacre Shamar, I think it was, for wanting to take, was it Dinah, the sister? Some of you Bible scholars jump in there, as his wife, and he jumped ahead of things, and they slaughtered the whole place. And there's a little bit more, but it's a little graphic for that at 7:15 in the morning. So there it is from the beginning. Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, they want to take out the Jewish people. And why? Because the forces of evil, the demonic is real. Satan, the Antichrist, all that stuff is real, and the promises of God, they want to break those down. Okay? But God held them in an unseen leash until the iniquity of Israel was full, and then he permitted them, which was the world power at the time, at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, right, of the Babylonian king of Babylon, in Jeremiah 27, verses 5 through 7, to take these people over and make them captive. But during this time, Nebuchadnezzar also recognizes the talents of this man named Daniel, and the talents of these other 3 kids named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and we all know the stories of how God delivered these men. So, once again, only the power of God. So, I'm not reading out of this stuff, and we don't jump up at 7 o'clock in the morning to come up here and brag on these people in the Bible. We want to brag on the God that put this thing together, because there is enough history and there is enough information that we can look at this, and we better praise the Lord like nobody's business, for the simple reason that it's real. And because of the probability of all these predictions coming true, it's even more real. If that's even, I know realer is not a word. So it's just amazing what we got going on here. But yet you try to talk to somebody about Jesus and they're not interested. So it's pretty scary to think about what's going on. So the times of the Gentiles, okay, the beginning of the time of the Gentiles, which was spoken of by Jesus in Luke 21:24, is a period of time in the mind of God that has certain